So, Stewart, thank you so much for making time to share your insights into the future of leadership.
Well, thank you for letting me share my leadership journey on your platform. Thank you.
You're most welcome, Stewart, and it's great to have you on the show. Before we walk into the future, can you please tell us a little bit about your background? Where did you grow up?
Sure. First of all, I just want to say I'm quite impressed with the array of leaders that you've engaged with, and I'm actually quite honored. I really am. One of the things I've noticed when you ask me the question about where did I grow up is, in general, I would say that I share with a lot of your leaders that you've interviewed a very similar background. One of a person that grew up during the apartheid era. That seemed to have been a recurring theme. Yeah. And if you recall, certainly for me, our dreams in general was to have a better life. I suppose that would be it. And you know, so lived in the Cape Flats, got moved several times, and to a large degree came from a fairly large family. It's quite interesting. Some people always say, "Oh, no, you know, those are poor areas." You know, when you talk about Mitchell's Plain and Nova Park, Woodstock. But to be honest, Nick, we never felt poor. We didn't know what the comparison was. And so for me, it was just a case of accepting where you were and then trying to do the best you could in that particular situation. Suffice to say that I was part of a large group of cousins. I think we might have been 20. And as it happened, I was the first of the cousins to matriculate. And so if I look at my dream was always to focus on education for myself. I think that to me would have been the critical thing.
And Stewart, who inspired you in your early days?
I guess I was inspired by my situation, quite frankly. You know, I had, as I said to you, as one of the first cousins to matriculate. And I guess, you know, my ambition was always to study, you know, beyond matriculation and really raise the bar, if you will, in our family circle. And as such, when I matriculated, I wanted to actually study a specific degree at the University of Cape Town. But if you recall, in those days, that was curtailed by what they called the quota system, which limited people of color to study specific, you know, degrees at these institutions. And so, you know, I started working immediately after matric, you know, and quite frankly, those, you know, those things shaped a lot of who I am and what I became. Not only you know, from a personal point of view, but certainly from a business point of view.
Now, Stewart, you're leading a very impressive career in tech. You've been leading Dell Computers for a long time. Now I believe you're leading Altron. Looking back over your career, would you say there was a turning point?
Oh, gee, that's a good question. I think I've had many turning points and inflection points. Maybe let me go back to the matric, because that was important. And I spoke to you about how I was unable to study what I intended to. After matric, virtually the day after I wrote my final exam, I went to work at a fishing company and I exported fish. And during my time there, I did a computer programming course at night. And I was lucky enough to come out as the top student and was offered employment by IBM, who, by the way, were the sponsors of that one-year course. And that was a major inflection point for two reasons. One, it was my entry into what was becoming a desired field to work in, which was technology. And number two, the IBM program was what I would call an early stage corporate social investment for them, and probably awakened in me the concept of giving back and the impact it can have on people's lives. So that sort of community investment was quite important. So that was maybe the first inflection point. The next was when I was at IBM, I trained as a systems engineer, and I was focused on coding, on computer systems designs and configurations. And I became involved in the IBM PC launch in 1983. I was one of the first guys. And I spent, as a result of that, a lot of time working in the US with developers on things like the architecture and operating systems. I was basically a tech nerd, but I enjoyed being at the forefront of technology. And quite frankly, I enjoyed the fruits of being successful in that field. But in my mind, that was not enough. By nature, I'm a competitive person. I operate to a growth mindset of never give up. And here was the second inflection point, because it bothered me that I did not complete my studies beyond matric. And I felt that for my own personal growth, that this was something I needed to correct. So in 1989, traveling back from the US, on one of my many stints there, I saw an ad from UCT inviting applications for a BCom honors. I applied, and believe it or not, again, I was rejected, this time because I had no base degree. So after convincing them to take a chance on me, I completed the honors program and ended up as the top student of that cohort. And I did, as a sort of a acknowledgement of that, I did a program for management development. And what that did is it created a critical shift in my career, if you will. If you can imagine, here I was as a systems engineer. What it awakened in me was this whole thing around business and business management. And as such, that's when I made the switch from being a techie to a businessman. And, that's when I started my management career. I started small. I ended up running large businesses in IBM, locally and internationally. And I was headhunted by Dell. And in the 15 years that I spent at Dell, I headed up many local and international portfolios. So I exited my business life privileged, that I was able to sort of grow people, give back to communities. And it honed the servant leadership journey in ways that was impactful to the careers and fortunes of many people. So I was very, very fortunate.
Thank you. So, Stewart, what would you say is driving you today?
What drives me today is my purpose. And my purpose is simple, and it works for me. And my purpose, very simply, is to connect and inspire people to be their significant best. And what it does is it keeps me connected to the business world, to friends and family, and it affords me, if you will, opportunities to give back of my knowledge, my experience, and the network I've accumulated over more than 35 years of working. More importantly, it enables me to tell the story that I've lived in an inspiring way. And through it, I can emphasize the attributes of what I call significance over success as a legacy play. So to me, purpose is what drives me and what gets me up in the morning.
Thank you. Now, Stewart, looking into the future, and I know it's a big question, but what does the future of leadership mean to you?
I guess context will be critical now and in the future. And there are two perspectives that I think needs constant focus in terms of the future of leadership. The first one is one always has to be aware of the external focus, the external forces that impacts your operating environment. And to me, that was one of the critical things I always had to look at was what was happening outside in terms of geopolitics, macroeconomics, even things like the elections, technology advancements like AI, for example. All of these things were important to know because it was important to almost see the future and try and anticipate the future. But at the same time, and this is critically important, alongside that, it's important to keep a focus on the internal priorities. And the internal priorities nowadays is, while it's still about doing the job and getting to the numbers and all the things that we talk about, more and more it's, as leaders, it is becoming about leading culture and managing talent and how people work and new ways of working. All of these things now need to be prioritized. And the principal operating mantra that I've always tried to do in terms of not only understanding the context we operate in, but it's developing a passion for executing only the things which you can control. That to me is going to be quite important. Otherwise, you will be distracted. And
Right.
we've got to remember at the end of the day, we've got a job to do.
So, Stuart, what is it we have to do more to build future leaders and develop future servant leaders?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, I landed largely on the servant leadership style of management. I believe, I mean, this is the style that has carried me through for the last 30-odd years in leadership. But I know that based on that style, it's still a style for the future for the following reasons. It's resilient and it's relevant, irrespective of the operating context. Why? Because it focuses, Dr. Nick, on the soft skills. And by the way, you know, in my experience, the soft skills are sometimes the harder things to practice. Now, by way of example, I think, you know, again, a lot of your previous interviewers have honed in on it, but it's things like emotional intelligence, ethical leadership, inclusiveness, lifelong learning, digital fluency. All of these things are quite important and soft skills. So they're not about what have you been trained to do. It's what have you embellished your core competency. What soft skills have you embellished around those core competencies? Now, many who know me and know that I play a long game, and I think that's a critical thing in a time when things are changing so rapidly. And you know, for me, it's about prioritizing the longer term horizon over the short term. That's one of the essence of servant leadership. It's looking to the future, it's setting the vision, and it's managing through purpose and passion to that vision. And so for me, that's quite important. I'm reminded as I'm talking to you, when I wrote my farewell speech or email at Dell, I like using the term something is temporary and something is permanent. And I remember saying, you know, I always emphasize profit, while it's important, is temporary and purpose is permanent. To me, management is temporary, leadership is permanent. You see where I'm going to? Diversity is temporary, inclusion is permanent. Right. I had all of these built up over time that was more as a marker as to when I was in a conflict with certain things, what was more important to emphasize than just the obvious. And I tended to go for what was permanent. You know, and in today's world, as an individual leader, while you might have the reputation, that is who others think you are, what is more important is the character as more permanent. In other words, who you really are. And I think, to me, that's that becomes the critical thing. So having these sort of, you know, guardrails, if you will, has helped me to be quite consistent as a leader. And I think when you look at people and what they're looking for is they're looking for a leader that is consistent. You know, in that context. So, you know, I hope that answers the question. But I was just saying, I play a long game. In essence, you know, of leadership. You know, for me, that's a legacy play. It's inherent in a legacy play, and that's at the end of the day what you want to leave.
So, Stuart, would you say it's fair we should spend more time on developing our character?
Absolutely. I do believe at the end of the day, people follow people that influence. And what the other caveat I'm adding on to that, because you can have influence both good and bad, good influence, positive influence, I think is what gets people motivated and aligned to a shared vision.
Thank you. Now, Stuart, these are challenging times as the world is stumbling from one crisis into the next. What is your advice for future leaders in terms of challenges? What are some of the biggest challenges they should expect to encounter and hopefully overcome in their career?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. I think maybe two perspectives on that. As I said to you earlier, I think it will be about how do you balance the external factors or that context in which you operate and balance that with internal priorities. One of the biggest challenges in business today is what I call strategic, or what is called strategic execution. This is the ability to say, I'm going to do something, I'm going to be something, and then stick to it and get it done. And what tends to happen is there's a lot of distraction in between that either falters those particular goals, and as such, you never quite deliver. So it's why I say we've got to focus on the things we can control. First point. I've learned that, and I think this will be even more relevant as something that is a challenge that needs to be overcome. I've learned that handling uncertainty is a superpower in an ever-changing world. To me, that's something that needs to be at the back of your mind. And so this ability to act decisively in an agile and adaptable way, I think will differentiate future leaders. And so that agility, that adaptability is quite important. And of course, what it means is, based on the second point on your slide, is it suggests that there's some skills, they're not necessarily new, but skills that might well be latent in leaders that need to come to the fore. So the types of skills I'm talking about is, how do you deal with ambiguity? How do you exercise critical thinking? More importantly, how do you exercise systems thinking about the ecosystem? And then, as I said to you, strategic execution in the face of all this disruption and distraction. I think those are attributes that will really start to equip you well to handle a very uncertain world. The other thing that it might be a question we're going to address later, but how do you find role models who role model the attributes that you admire? And I'm talking obviously, especially the soft skills of behavior and values. Those become quite important in terms of looking around, because at the end of the day, we're not fully equipped for the future. But what fully equips us is when we role model and we look at some of the things that we know to be our weaknesses. That's what good leaders do. They understand themselves, they're self-aware, and we start to hone those skills that start to address some of the things that we need to work on as leaders.
Now, Stewart, as a prominent tech leader, what is your view on AI? What role do you see AI play in building a better future and building a better world?
Yeah, perhaps I should start off and say, the one fear excuse me, I hear quite often is, AI is going to take our jobs. It is quite interesting. Let's just look at at work and work of the future. I think work of the future now says that people will be hybrid in many, many ways. I think working from home is a given. I think more importantly, when we look at the future workforce, it will be tech savvy. This whole digital literacy that I talk about, they will be that. And as such, when you look at AI and have the fear that AI is going to take or artificial intelligence systems are going to start to replace us at work, I don't quite think that that's the right framing. I think the right framing would be that people that embrace AI will replace people that don't, is probably the better way to look at it. And so I think we must accept, and when we talk about these different phases of technology, we are entering the new phase of how machines are starting to mimic a lot of what we do. Even today, machines cannot have the feelings that humans have. So there's still a place for us. It's one of the reasons I emphasize these soft skills, by the way. But more importantly, it will help in the productivity, the faster execution. It is something to be embraced, but it's got to be embraced in the with the same standards that we embrace the human being. And that is the integrity, the ethical standards, and all the things that we know about. And so how we integrate these two, both human and AI, into the workforce is something that I know a lot of organizations are thinking about, and certainly, watching the rest of the world, this external focus that I talk about, watching the rest of the world in terms of best practices of how to best integrate that into the culture of the organization and the way we work. So it has a future, there's no doubt.
Thank you. So, Stewart, as a mentor to many future leaders, can you maybe share a success story or two where you mentored an upcoming leader and that person took your advice to heart?
When I thought about that, I said to myself, gee, there's quite a few that I have, but maybe two to mention, because again, I like to come back to the principles of mentorship in this particular context. The first one was when I was going to interview somebody for a role at the company I was working. They pitched up late for the interview. I was a little upset by it because it showed a lack of professionalism. But then again, the servant leadership style says, well, let me try and understand why were you late. And when I understood why this individual was late, it changed and softened me. He was late because he didn't have money to travel from where he was to the interview and had to go to the taxi rank to try and get money to get there. Right. So I went, wow. And then I said to him, well, have you got money to go home? And he said, not really. So I gave him some money. Well, Dr. Nick, he wrote to me a couple of years later to thank me because he used that money to go to his next interview, and he got that job, and he had risen through the ranks to become a senior person. Now, the point of that story is not so much, it's a true story, by the way. It's not so much that he wrote to me, I appreciated that, but it was this random act of kindness that would prove to me that sometimes, we don't have to do the big things to leave legacies. We can do the small things. And it also points out to me that's the difference between success and significance. In this particular case, I was significant to that individual because he mentioned me. I didn't mention, it's when somebody else speaks about you. That's far more fulfilling than to show off your fancy car and house and be successful as a salesman and all that. No. It's the significance of that. So to me, that was a critical thing. Second story, I served on the board of a school called Crystal House here in Cape Town. It services the poorest of the poor, but it has a vision to ensure that the poorest of the poor can get access to education and thrive. And so one of the things that they did was where as soon as I think they might have been grade 1 or 2, I forget now, but as soon as they could read, they would take the students to the old age home to read for the grannies and the grandpas. And to me, what that said is you don't have to have a lot to give back, right? These small acts, they're bigger than some of the fanfare that you hear. And so my personal lesson has always been, small acts go a long way in terms of making impact. And so that's the one, the two stories I would give as impact on, and success stories that I've come across. There are many, but those two gave me those lessons of random acts of kindness go a long way. And you don't have to have much to make an impact in terms of giving back.
So it's more about your mindset and your heart set, right?
100% right. 100% right. And, there's one other thing in that. I learned actually through my own journey. Let me, because that's important. One of the things about leaders is you've got to be able to lead yourself. And I've no problems, saying to you that I've just recovered from a serious illness, and I'm okay. But I learned, two things, or maybe three things. The first thing is that, leaders have to take responsibility to lead responsibly. And so when I look at myself, there are always four things I emphasize: health, my values, my relationship with family and friends, and the last one is, I call it wealth, but it's not just money, right? you know, your networks is what your wealth, for example, you know, all of those good things. And to me, my focus on health was a critical thing. So as a leader, I took responsibility to ensure that I was always in the best health. And thank heavens I did that, because that's how we picked up I had an issue. I would encourage leaders to constantly think about the impact they would have if they were not there, or the negative impact they would have if they were not there to lead their companies. And so looking after yourself is a key responsibility to take. That's the first one. The second one is to stay true to your purpose. And I said to you, in my purpose, I inspire. So despite that I was sick and ill and recovering, I still found it refreshing to be able to call people and find out how they were doing. And through my story and through my living and through my coming through this illness, inspire them in terms of the mindset that you spoke about. I think that's an important thing. So I had a very strong mindset. And one of the things that I can play back in terms of lessons is I learned how to keep things simple. So the path to contentment is really a simple life. I, quite frankly, have less possessions now. I have less stuff to worry about. I'm really, really focused now more on leaving legacy than I am of, you know, leaving things, possessions. Right. So to me, leading yourself is a key part. And so that's a success story in a way. You know, I was able to apply my servant leadership mindset to my own situation, and I promise you it worked.
Thank you. Now, Stewart, looking back over your own leadership journey, are there any role models of leadership that you encountered and maybe worked with that you would recommend future leaders should study and learn from?
Well, it's interesting. My role models have all been people that have been close to me. And so that's perhaps the first thing I would say to people is look at your immediate community, look at your immediate circle of influence, because you will find role models there. They exist in all walks of life. And I think the litmus test for role modeling is what I call this positive influence. And so I'm, you know, my own style was I take a lot of notes. I would note the context and the leadership lesson I was experiencing at the time, and often I would refer back to that when it was needed. So just role models come from all walks of life, and it is a lifelong journey of just encountering and discerning and, you know, just soaking it up. So lifelong learning is perhaps the best mentor. You know, just learn from others. Yeah.
Now, Stewart, how can our listeners connect with you, and where should they follow you?
Well, if you want to know more about me, just do the Google search. I think actually I did an interview. I don't know, Dr. Nick. It might have been 10, 15 years ago. It was an SABC program. There people will get a view of my earlier leadership journey, and that would be interesting. But I'm like most people, I'm on LinkedIn. That's my business platform. I'm more into one-on-one mentorship, and that keeps me motivated and busy, and helps me sort of, you know, with this the focus on giving back. But basically, people can find me on LinkedIn. That would be the best platform right now.
Right. And last but not least, Stewart, what is your message to the millions of learners out there who are looking to finish school, to start a career? What are maybe one or two success principles they should keep in mind?
Yeah. Well, I think most of what you and I chatted now about is, hopefully you would have seen, I haven't strayed much from my purpose. I think having a sense of purpose and live it through, you know, what I learned was quite important. So again, to repeat, it's to connect and inspire people to be their significant best. That's what wakes me up. And you mentioned the mindset and the heart. You know, of course, that is where I come from. That's what servant leadership is about. The head, they call it the 4 H's. The head and the heart informs the hands and the habits. And that is servant leadership described in a very practical way. And that's what I try to live every day.
Well, Stewart, thank you so much for sharing your insights into the future of leadership and inspiring us to be our significant best.
It's an absolute pleasure, and thank you again for having me on your platform. I appreciate it.